Support for Central Florida Public Media comes from Orange County Library System, offering enriching programs and resources for seniors at 15 locations throughout the county, with hands-on workshops, expert-led seminars, and more. A complete list of programs is available at ocls.org/senior/events.
The Florida Legislature approves new congressional maps. What happens next? You're listening to The Wrap from Central Florida Public Media. I'm Brendan Byrne. The Florida Legislature agreed to do away with its current congressional map on Wednesday. It already gives Republicans 20 of Florida's 28 U.S. House seats. But now, GOP lawmakers have passed Governor Ron DeSantis' proposed map, erasing 4 more Democratic-leaning seats. Democrats call the move an illegal political gerrymander. Lawsuits are expected once the governor signs the bill. So what happens next? Central Florida Public Media's elections reporter Sam Stockbridge walks us through what's to come. That's ahead on The Wrap. The big stories this week from Central Florida Public Media. But first, these headlines. Bandit, one of the 13 sloths brought to the Central Florida Zoo and Botanical Gardens last Friday, has died. Central Florida Public Media's Joe Burns reports on yet another animal death associated with the Sloth World attraction previously planned for International Drive.
Bandit didn't make it, despite the Central Florida Zoo's best efforts and constant care. Zoo CEO Richard Glover says Bandit was the most critical of the 13, and his team did everything they could.
He'd fought as long as he could fight, and he just didn't have anything left. And by a little before midday, he'd reached a point where he just was essentially non-responsive.
When it was clear the young sloth wouldn't recover, he was euthanized. The other 12 from the Sloth World warehouse in Orange County remain in 30-day quarantine. Glover says all have serious issues, but they're stable right now, and zoo officials are cautiously optimistic. At least 32 sloths, and possibly many more that were sent to Orlando for the attraction, have died. Joe Burns, Central Florida Public Media.
State Representative Anna Escamani is calling for a criminal investigation into Sloth World. She said Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission reports raise, quote, serious concerns regarding potential violations of Florida law. Central Florida Public Media attempted to reach Sloth World President Benjamin Agresta for comment, but was unsuccessful. The Florida House did not address artificial intelligence or looser vaccine requirements during the special session this week. House Speaker Daniel Perez made the announcement against Governor DeSantis' wishes just before the start of the special session earlier this week. Central Florida Public Media's health reporter Joe Mario Pedersen tells us more.
Under the Medical Freedom Act, parents could waive the MMR vaccine that K-12 students are required to receive. It would let them do so on philosophical grounds. Currently, Florida parents can only do that for religious reasons. The bill passed through the Senate during the regular session but died in the House. Speaker Perez said he was, quote, uncomfortable with the effect on school children.
That there is some concern here on my behalf of children being in school without measles and mumps and polio and chickenpox vaccines that have been working for decades.
Measles cases have been on the rise throughout the country. Florida, too, has seen historic numbers of measles patients. Joe Mario Pedersen, Central Florida Public Media.
Congressman Daniel Webster is not seeking re-election. Webster, a Republican, represents Florida's 11th congressional district, which includes Sumter, Polk, Lake, and Orange counties. In a statement, Webster announced his plans to retire, saying the time had come to, quote, pass the torch to the next conservative leader. Webster was first elected to Congress in 2011. State Attorney Monique Worrell is not charging the 6 protesters arrested for chalking the crosswalk at the Pulse Massacre site in Orlando after state workers painted over its rainbow colors. They were arrested last year on felony criminal mischief for allegedly interfering with a traffic control device and causing more than $1,000 in damages. Worrell says the evidence does not support the charges. James Houchins was arrested in November. He says the decision brings, quote, a sigh of relief.
And I think this is a win for the whole community to show that, come back out, chalk, stand up. And I mean, personally, our little group, we're not going to stop. We've been at it for 246 days. Until they come back and paint it, we're not going to stop chalking.
Worrell's office found selective arrests, uncooperative troopers and state agencies, and no actual damage or defacement from the chalk. These stories and more on our website. Visit cfpublic.org. The Wrap Inbox Edition is your Wednesday digest of what matters most in Central Florida. The weekly newsletter delivers the top headlines, original reporting, and a handy guide to Central Florida public media events, all presented in a format that's quick and easy to read. It's the perfect companion to the Wrap podcast. Sign up at cfpublic.org/thewrap. Governor Ron DeSantis drew a congressional map that could potentially give the GOP 4 additional U.S. House seats by reducing Democratic-leaning districts. This controversial mid-decade redistricting started after President Trump said he wanted more Republican representatives. Usually, redistricting happens every 10 years to reflect the official census population count. On Wednesday, during a special session called by the governor, the Florida Legislature approved his new congressional maps that could take effect before the November midterm elections and Florida's August primaries. As the debate and vote was happening in Tallahassee, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision on voting rights that changed how states can draw those districts. It's likely Florida's maps will be challenged in the courts. So what happens next? Central Florida Public Media's elections reporter Sam Stockbridge spoke with Sharon Stone about the path ahead for the new maps.
So, Sam, you have spent hours following this special session this week very closely. Just bring us up to speed on what's happened and where things stand now.
Yeah, absolutely. The short of the matter is that this happened all really fast. State lawmakers got their first look at the map on Monday, and the first committee votes came on Tuesday, and by Wednesday afternoon, both the Florida House and the Senate had approved the map, redrawing the congressional districts, sending them back to Governor Ron DeSantis to be signed into law.
Okay, a very quick process. So what are some of the significant changes for Central Florida districts?
Well, a big one is, you might remember from our earlier programming that Osceola County voters have been represented by Democrat Darren Soto for nearly a decade. The new map makes some pretty big changes there. Once signed into law, District 9 would be extended about twice as far south as it is right now, and it would include Okeechobee, Indian River, Glades, and Highland counties. It'll also lose some of its coverage area for South Orlando voters. Now, this is significant because these changes effectively eliminate the only Hispanic majority Democratic congressional seat in Florida, which has been held by Soto for 9 years. Those Democratic-leaning voters have been split up. To give this some more context, Republicans currently hold 20 of Florida's 28 congressional seats. With these new maps, the GOP is given an advantage in 4 more districts, meaning Republicans could possibly end up with 85% of the seats representing Florida in Washington, D.C.
Okay, Sam, I want to go back to what you were talking about with Central Florida's 9th congressional district being the lone Hispanic majority Democratic congressional seat. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 says that maps cannot unfairly weaken the voices of minority voters. Yesterday, at the same time that this was playing out in Florida, in a split decision, the conservative majority U.S. Supreme Court decided a Louisiana map that created a majority black district was unconstitutional racial gerrymandering because it relied on race too much. So, Sam, can you explain, how does that federal decision on voting rights impact what Florida lawmakers can do in drawing maps here?
Yeah, well, this also gets really interesting because in 2010, Floridians voted to amend the state constitution here to protect voters from gerrymandering on a few fronts, including the same racial fronts that are protected under the Voting Rights Act. The Fair District Amendments here in Florida explicitly ban gerrymandering that favors one party over another, and they also add protections for minority representation that mimic the Voting Rights Acts. DeSantis believes the move by the Supreme Court in Louisiana v. Calais invalidates all of those state amendments. Critics of the new maps, including nonpartisan voting advocacy groups, have said that the new ruling doesn't allow lawmakers here to ignore the state constitution. Here's Amy Keith with Common Cause Florida. Republicans were mostly silent during floor debate on Wednesday, but the handful that did speak in favor of the new maps said the court's ruling justified the decision to ignore race.
So, Sam, have we heard from the governor on this?
Yeah, we have. In fact, DeSantis has argued that because the amendments didn't include what's called a severability clause to clarify that the protections stand independently, if one of them gets struck down, everything in the amendments would be invalid. Democrats, including South Orlando Representative Rita Harris, in turn have argued that that strategy runs counter to the changes that a strong majority of Florida voters approved in 2010.
Okay, so what does this all mean for Central Florida voters? Are they going to see new districts, new candidates, maybe new confusion?
Yeah, the new maps are almost certainly going to cause a lot of confusion for voters, candidates, and election supervisors. For voters and candidates here in Central Florida, they won't necessarily be in the same districts as they were in 2024. Current representatives, including Darren Soto, will have to get to know the issues animating new counties, communities, and voters that are in their districts now. And many voters will need to learn or relearn who they'll see on their ballots on Election Day. And for county officials throughout Florida, they'll be scrambling to understand those changes and to help keep their voters informed. The new maps could force them to move polling precincts, and in Florida, if you vote in person at the wrong precinct on Election Day, your ballot won't be counted. Doing all of that for county election workers will cost money and extra hours from staff. The new maps in Florida will also result in lawsuits. Several voting advocacy groups have signaled interest in challenging the new maps in court because of all of those complications. And a judge looking at the lawsuit could decide that it's simply too close to the election to use the new maps and revert to using the existing maps for this year's midterms.
So you're saying after all of this, we could still end up with the same maps we were using last time?
Basically, yeah. Although keeping the existing maps wouldn't necessarily undo any confusion or money that got spent in the meantime. But again, nobody really knows what will happen until then. DeSantis has a conservative state Supreme Court filled almost entirely with his appointees, and that court was sympathetic to his voting maps last year, limiting the scope of the Fair District amendments even back then. Candidates have about a month left until the filing deadline, so the clock is ticking for this clarity to come on what's actually happening for the midterms.
Central Florida Public Media Elections and Investigations reporter Sam Stockbridge, thank you for walking us through all of that.
Thanks for having me.
That was Central Florida Public Media's elections reporter Sam Stockbridge speaking with Sharon Stone about the path ahead for the new map. That's it for The Wrap this week. This podcast is produced by Central Florida Public Media with editorial assistance from News Director Latoya Dennis. I'm Brendan Byrne. This is The Wrap.